weight control. Over the last 40 years, obesity rates have tripled among older adults. 43% of Americans over the age 60 are not just overweight, but obese. This can't just be ascribed to slower metabolism. Resting metabolic rate, the calories we burn just to keep us alive, remains stable from the time we're 20 through 60, after which it only declines by about 10 calories a day per year. So don't blame your metabolism. As I documented in detail in my book, How Not to Diet, blame the food. Obesity is associated with accelerated cellular aging, as measured by telomere shortening or advanced epigenetic age, presumably due to the oxidative stress and systemic inflammation that accompanies excess body fat. Obesity is associated with declining physical function in terms of mobility limitations as well as declining cognitive function. MRI scans of hundreds of individuals across the age spectrum found that the brain shrinkage of white matter in overweight and obese individuals corresponded to having a brain that was up to 10 years older. A meta-analysis of 19 studies following more than 500,000 people for up to 42 years found that midlife obesity was associated with a 33% increased risk of developing dementia. And each 1-point increase above a body mass index of 20 at age 50 appeared to move up the onset of Alzheimer's by about 7 months. What about obesity and mortality? Visceral reaction. Thanks to part of the obesity epidemic, we may now be raising the first American generation to live shorter lives than their parents. This downward trend in lifespan is expected to accelerate as the current younger generation, who started out even heavier earlier, ages into adulthood. Some predict that in the coming decades we may lose 2 to 5 years of life expectancy in the United States, or even more. To put that into perspective, a miracle cure for all forms of cancer would only add 3.5 years to the average American lifespan. In other words, reversing the obesity epidemic might save more lives than curing cancer. Even a moderate midlife weight gain of approximately 10 to 20 pounds might significantly reduce the odds of healthy survival later in life. In a study of more than 600 centenarians, less than 2% of women and not 1 of the men were obese. After the age of 40, obesity may reduce life expectancy by as much as 6 or 7 years. As we age, the fat in our body also tends to redistribute from the superficial jiggly flab under our skin, subcutaneous fat, to deep stores that wrap around our internal organs and bulge out our abdomens, visceral fat, especially in women. Between 25 and 65 women lose approximately 13 pounds of bone and muscle, while quadrupling stores of visceral fat. Men's visceral fat stores typically only double. So even if the bathroom scale doesn't indicate any weight gain, a woman may be gaining the worst kind of fat. Even at the same overall body fat or BMI, the greater one's waistline, the shorter one's lifeline. Visceral fat is the killer fat. In contrast, superficial fat is relatively benign. The New England Journal of Medicine published a study of 15 obese women assessed before and after having about 20 pounds of superficial fat sucked from their bodies, which resulted in an almost 20% decrease in their total body fat. Significant improvements in blood sugars, inflammation, blood pressure, cholesterol, and triglycerides are typically seen with just a 5 to 10% loss of body weight and fat. But after the massive liposuction, none of those benefits materialized. This suggests that the subcutaneous fat under the skin is not the problem, but rather the visceral fat is what's responsible for the metabolic insults of obesity. The good news is that the riskiest fat is the easiest to lose. Our body appears to preferentially shed the villainous visceral fat first, and lifestyle interventions appear to have a similar weight loss efficacy in older compared to younger people. The life-shortening effects of visceral fat have been proven in rats. Surgical removal resulted in a significant extension in average and maximal lifespans. What about in people? Those who get bariatric weight loss surgery do go on to live significantly longer than weight-matched controls who don't. Details in c.nf/bariatric, but there haven't been any randomized trials to confirm it. There are, however, randomized weight loss trials using diet and lifestyle interventions. All fat calories aren't the same. A meta-analysis of 15 studies that randomized men and women to weight loss regimens for up to 12 years found that losing weight doesn't only decrease inflammation, blood pressure, blood sugars, and disability, but it extends life by decreasing the risk of premature death by about 15%. So, what's the best weight loss diet? A whole food plant-based diet was found to result in the greatest weight loss ever reported in the medical literature at 6 and 12 months compared to any other diet in randomized control studies that similarly didn't limit calories or mandate exercise. One of the reasons may be its lower fat intake. When people were randomized to eat a low-fat plant-based diet, they naturally ate about 600 fewer calories a day compared to those randomized to a high-fat ketogenic diet. This led to a significant loss of body fat and a preservation of lean body mass, the opposite of what was found in the ketogenic dieters, who saw no significant loss of body fat but did experience a reduction of lean body mass as their bodies appeared to cannibalize their own body protein, even though they were eating more protein. All fat is not equal, though. In How Not to Diet, I bust the myth that a calorie is a calorie. A calorie from one source isn't always as fattening as a calorie from any other. If you eat about the same number of calories and the same amount of fat, for instance, but replace meat and butterfat with nuts, avocados, and olive oil, you could lose nearly 6 more pounds of fat in just 1 month. Saturated fat can also cause twice the accumulation of visceral fat compared to the same amount of other fats. Why? One reason saturated fats may be more fattening is that they appear to be more likely to be stored immediately rather than burned. For example, oleic acid, the primary monounsaturated fat in nuts, avocados, and olives, is promptly burned about 20% more readily than palmitic acid, which is sourced mainly from meat and dairy and is the predominant saturated fat in the American diet. In fact, you can drip palmitic acid on muscle cells in a petri dish and openly demonstrate the suppression of fat utilization. For other reasons why healthier eating can be so effective at weight loss, check out How Not to Diet from your local public library. A sidebar: going to bat against fat. At birth, we emerge all wet and slimy from the balmy 98.6 degrees of our mother's wombs directly into room temperature. To maintain warmth, we developed an adaptive mechanism around 150 million years ago, the appearance of a unique organ called brown adipose tissue, or BAT, B-A-T for short, which enables us warm-blooded mammals to maintain our high body temperatures. BAT generates heat by consuming fat calories in response to exposure to the cold. The white fat in our belly stores fat, but the brown fat that's found high in our chest burns fat. BAT activation is not only a potential means to blunt the age-related decline in metabolic rate, but may also play a role in longevity. BAT activity appears to be higher in long-lived animals and diminished in short-lived ones, and a gene that increases longevity in mice was found to boost BAT activity. Experiments surgically removing and transplanting brown fat between animals confirmed the role of BAT in healthy aging, at least in mice. If the same is true for humans, that could possibly help explain why women live longer than men, as females have greater BAT deposits throughout life. BAT activation enhances the secretion of the fasting and longevity hormone FGF21, as I'll talk about later, but unfortunately BAT activity decreases with age. Cold-stimulated BAT activity can be as high as 100% in those younger than 40, but may drop down to less than 10% in older individuals. You don't have to be left out in the cold, though. As I describe in How Not to Diet, there are dietary compounds that can boost BAT activation. Chili pepper compounds, for example, can do it, and have been tested up through age 64. The dosing works out to a whole raw jalapeno pepper or half teaspoon of red pepper powder a day. To help beat the heat, finely chop or very thinly slice the jalapeno to reduce its kick, or mix the red pepper into soup or the whole food vegetable V8 smoothie I feature in one of my cooking videos on nutritionfacts.org. Alternately, there's ground ginger. It increases weight loss, potentially through BAT activation, at a teaspoon a day, which you can just stir into hot water to make ginger tea. What's the ideal weight for longevity? We seem to have been inured to the mortal threat of obesity. If you go back a half-century or so in the medical literature, when obesity wasn't run-of-the-mill, the descriptions are much more grim. Quote, "Obesity is always tragic, and its hazards are terrifying," unquote. But it's not just obesity. Of the 4 million deaths attributed to excess body fat each year, Nearly 40% of the victims are merely overweight, not obese. What about the so-called obesity paradox, evidence suggesting overweight individuals live longer? The Global BMI Mortality Collaboration busted this myth using data from more than 10 million people from hundreds of studies conducted in dozens of countries around the world. Go to c.nf/paradox for details. So, what's the optimal BMI? The largest studies in the United States and around the world found that having a normal body mass index between 20 and 25 is associated with the longest lifespan. When you put together all the best available studies with the longest follow-up, that ideal range can be narrowed down even further, to a BMI of 20 to 22, which is about 124 to 136 pounds for someone who stands 5 feet 6 inches tall. In the attached PDF, you can use the unisex chart to see what your optimal weight might be based on your height.